I'm gonna start with the Jones family, since that's the last film we watched. So Derek, Natural, why don't you guys come on up? Please make yourselves comfortable. This is very interesting screening because we've had two films that are about social issues in their own ways. The Ringers and Washers, I'm excited to hear about your organization, Ben, just because I think it's important that stories about Youngstown and Mahoning Valley are told. And then we also, of course, have your film, which is very clearly about social issues and social justice. The point of the Q&A is to hear about the film and the process that you guys went through making it. But I'm just going to step out of character for a moment and tell you that I think this is an extraordinary film. I think that you guys have a hard road ahead. I think that the issue that you're tackling is going to be a tough sell. But I also think that your storytelling is very clean and compelling, and it definitely speaks for itself. So thank you for making this film and enlightening all of us. How did you set out on the road to make this film?
Well, initially, I was at Ohio University School of Film in the graduate program, earning my MFA, and my mom had called me and said she was coming to town. She's involved in this play about the Lucasville prison uprising. So when she came to campus, I had went and watched the play, and it was one of those stories where I had, being from Ohio, I'd known that this had happened back in 1993, as a lot of people in Ohio did and around the nation. But hearing this particular play, which was a take on the story from the inmate perspective, because that was not put out there in the media. During this time or after this time, is to talk about what the inmates' experience was during that whole situation. And so watching the play, and this was based off of a book by Stott and Lynn about the uprising, and I was thinking, wow, this might make an interesting film to talk about, in addition to a book, a play, another way to access the information. So it kind of set off on the mission then, and that was back in 2007 to get in touch with the inmates and people and start to talk about this situation in specific. And we went on that process, started shooting a film, collecting a lot of stuff, and Natural could probably pick up the story from there.
Well, when I moved to Ohio in 1993, and so I wasn't familiar with the Lucasville uprising, and when it was presented to me that that's what he was making the film about, I was very, very interested, both because I had already had my own personal experience with the criminal justice system and because social awareness issues have always been of grave interest to me. However, having been incarcerated myself and having dealt with lots of inmate issues, having dealt with lots of social injustice issues, I recognized rather quickly that it's necessary to get people to open their ears, to open their eyes, to not sit around, texting on their phones while you're discussing issues like this, or, picking at their fingernails, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I was really concerned with how it is that we would be able to get people to, or how Dee, at this point in time, I wasn't as involved, but how he would get people to care. People hear about prison riots. They know that prisons exist. They know that there are inmates inside of these institutions. The connectivity between these inmates being human beings who are having their own experiences that need to be understood and respected before judgment calls are made. It exists, and I was like, you got to get people to care. How are you going to get people to understand that the prison system is flawed in our society, and that a lot of the people that end up there as a result of dealing with disenfranchisement and just problems that are posed to them often from very, very early ages on up, not to mention the racial side of things and how there is a demographic of people out here that are being targeted for the prison system. We could talk about this prison uprising and hopefully people will be interested. Will it impassion them enough to consider why it happened? Because it was about human rights violations. would it move people to basically, and excuse my language, to give a damn. And that was the goal. It's not just to have people know what's happening, but it's to impassion them about what's happening and to take a stand one way or the other in regards to the system itself, not just this particular very individual and specific uprising that took place. So I kind of started to encourage him at that point in time to consider doing a series. One, because people don't, you keep that attention for a certain period of time, and it's much easier to get the information across in a short period of time, but also to attack it from the perspective of Prison Industrial Complex 101, so that everybody understands what the prison industrial complex is, who it is impacting, which is everybody, and why it is being perpetuated as a system, as an institution in our society. And so he listens to me, and from the very beginning on, he listens to me, and he took that under advisement, and I think it kind of worked to his benefit too, because he was looking to do this as his thesis film, and it started to get really, really big, really, really quickly. And so it needed to be a certain length, it needed to have a certain level of content to it, it needed to be grounded in a different way. And I think that it made it easier for him to be able to complete his master's program, as well as it makes it easier for us to get people involved in the conversation, get people involved into the thought process, and I don't know, get everybody to think about what our prison system means in the society, why it's happening, what is it actually happening, and who it's impacting.
Interesting. That makes sense. Now, I have to ask you, first of all, it was very bold to go on camera and talk about your own incarceration. I have to ask you, like, in taking the film around to screenings, how often do you find yourself in a position where it seems like someone wants you to first apologize for being an inmate before they'll listen?
Never.
Well, that's
Oddly enough, I really love it. I do.
Okay.
Because the person that I sit here as today, obviously much more mature, but this is who I was before I became involved in the activities that landed me in prison. I've been very fortunate to be one of those people who's kind of experienced both sides of things. Education has always been very important. I didn't grow up in a broken family per se. I had a father, I had a mother, we lived in the suburbs, they both owned their own businesses. The going to prison was a complete lapse from me being who it is that I am. I mean, I was a social activist before I became a drug addict. And my drug addiction, I think that I probably could have made the same turnaround back into my healthy lifestyle, my happy, fulfilled lifestyle, if I had gone to rehab, if I had gone to a facility that was focused on rebuilding me as a person. But I think that, on the other hand, going into the prison system was a necessity for me, so that I could understand that there were so many people out here who do not get the opportunity at rehabilitation or correction. I didn't get that from the prison system. I got that from who it is I am as a person. I got that from having this huge level of support outside of the prison system, and recognizing right off the bat that I was not going back. There was nothing in the world that was going to take me back to the world of addiction, that was going to land me back in the prison system. But I don't think I would have been as impassioned about fighting for inmates' rights and that particular social justice issue. My very first social justice issue, I would have to say, was about Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was in prison in Philadelphia and for years was on death row for the murder of a police officer. And there was this back and forth with whether or not he should be on death row or get life or a new trial. And this is what we were battling for, the new trial. And I became extremely passive during my time of prior to incarceration. And in that time, he was taken off of death row, but it was turned into a life sentence. And, a lot of people who were fighting for his cause were okay with that. And I began to recognize that there was a necessity to step up and say, that's not okay. That's not what we were fighting for. That's not what should be happening. There needs to be a recognition of how and why this particular individual and so many individuals end up in the prison system.
Right.
So I had to have that personal experience. Most people are just really amazed. That's what I get a lot of, and for me, it makes it so much easier to encourage people to not judge by the cover. You honestly have no idea who these people are, because they are kept separate from us in society, and we don't have any understanding that there are some people of great intellect that are there, people of great compassion, and nonetheless, no matter what type of people they are, they all deserve their basic human rights.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't gone to prison, I probably would not have cared as much as I do.
Okay. I just, from my own suburban experience, I've sort of always had an impression that in the United States, it's fairly easy to go to jail. I mean, I'm curious to know, just from this audience here, how many people have had a family member go to jail or prison? How many people have had more than one go to jail or prison? Okay, so a few of us have had multiples. The people in my family who have gone to jail or prison have been there for drug and alcohol, and of course, like things that are exacerbated by drugs and alcohol.
Or subsequent to that, addiction, or, yeah.
So, I'm surprised by some of the facts here, but I'm not surprised that the jail system is broken. I've also heard from other activists, and maybe you can tell me about your perspective on this, that the system is not only broken along like race lines, but like sexual lines. I mean, it's easier for women to go to jail, as I understand it, for crimes that men don't get sent to jail for because the men's prisons are already overcrowded.
The lines between race, between gender, between socioeconomic status, I guess that's why it's important to know that on one hand we do present how racialized the system is, but also one of the things that Angela Davis pointed out was that the racism that's in our institutions is a structural racism, and therefore within that structure includes that someone who is poor can have just as difficult a time in the system, and their race might not necessarily be a benefit to them in that situation, and the same thing with gender. And you probably have something to add to that, but I also wanted to say, kind of going back to Natural's ability to openly tell her story and do it so direct and convincingly. One of the things that she didn't mention is that we're both alum of the forensics team, both in the high school and the college level, and when Natural's back at BGSU competing in the college level, she was in the category of persuasive speaking, and in persuasive speaking she wrote a piece about the prison industrial complex, and incorporated her own experience into that, as to show that the notion that you can't judge a book by its cover, and very proud to say that she won the national championship in persuasive speaking, based on that speech and based on sharing her own experience, and
which I'm never ashamed to do. All of the experiences that we have create who we are as people. And I love who I am as a person. I'm not ashamed of who I am as a person. If I had to do it all over again, would I have chosen that path? Probably not. But am I sitting back sad about the fact that is the path that my life took? Absolutely not. And it works against me. Even in this day and age, I still have issues with being a felon. You will notice that one of the gentlemen in the film was talking about applying for jobs and credit, and Alvin Valentine was talking about how he applied for 99 jobs in 3 weeks, and he said on every single one of those applications I had to put that I was a felon because it's the law. And if you've ever, I'm sure everybody in here has filled out a job application, they literally give you a little box to check and these 2 tiny little lines to explain your felony. It's a virtual possibility. If you look at the court records of my felony, they're this big, and that I have 1 felony. And so, at the end of the day, there's no shame attached to that. In regards to how people are impacted by the prison system in our society, first of all, it's important for everybody to understand that while we do bring the racial capacity into this, with slavery, it's necessary to understand that slavery in the United States did not start as a race-based institution. It became a racially based institution when it was established that if we did it in a racial fashion, it would make it easier for slavery to exist in the United States. I mean, the Irish were enslaved in the United States. Many Asian peoples were enslaved in the United States long before the African was actually chosen to be the slave in the United States. And they were chosen for reasons that just made perfect sense when you're looking for a system to economically build your society without paying people to do so. Africans were easily identifiable. They were more resistant to a variety of illnesses that were taking place in the United States. They already knew agriculture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So while slavery is often carries the racist connotation to it, understand that racially based slavery is something that was kind of birthed here in the United States, and it was used to develop the economic stability of the United States. There are several people in our country who've been impacted by slavery, and they were not necessarily of African descent. And so quite obviously, when we discuss slavery attached to the prison system as well, clearly it's not just happening to people of color. And those people who were, in fact, subjected to slavery, it was always economic, it was always social. So at the end of the day, the social economic side of things is much more important to me personally than even the racially based side of things. And that people who come from the lower ends of society, and that's not hard to do, obviously. I mean, you have to be making $400,000 or more to be a part of the 1%. I don't make that kind of money. I don't know anybody personally that makes that kind of money. If you fall up underneath that, you definitely are subject to being included into a system that needs to have as much labor, as much manufacturing, as much power behind it, with the least amount of pay to those individuals, or the least amount of consideration for those individuals who are doing so.
We had a question over here.
Actually, it's not a question, but I wanted to add to what you were saying about the chosen. We did not import them from the Caribbean because it would have been closer, because language was an important part of that. We chose the Africans not only because of their color, but also because they didn't speak the English language. That meant them that they were easier to control because they could not, they couldn't interact with the society. They weren't a threat for an uprising.
And they were also unable to interact with one another.
That's
because
right.
they took them from different areas in the continent of Africa. And you've got people that have different religions, have different faith, different ways to worship, different cultures, different ethnicities, as well as the inability to communicate with one another. That was the problem with the Irish. They looked like the white men who were enslaving them. They all worshiped the same Catholic God. They were able to talk and create uprising. And so, and also with the Caribbean, they were not as resistant to the illness as well. And that was also the problem with the indigenous Americans. I mean, they tried to enslave Native Americans too. I mean, it wasn't, it was the African was chosen and divided in such a way that it made it perfect.
Right. I mean, the way you describe it almost sounds like the way I would pick a car.
Yeah.
You think about what you need it for and what's
Right.
easiest to run and
Right.
what's the least expensive, and you go with that.
Unless you're rich, then you just go get a Hummer.
We had another question.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Youngstown, but I spent all my teaching career in Philadelphia. And I can see how kids are chosen to be caught in the prison system, and it begins really early. And I remember this one student, a second grader, who there was a zero zero tolerance for violence in the school, and he got caught into that in a really, really strange way. He came to school. His mother had bought him a pencil set that had school scissors in them. These were not pointy scissors, these were school scissors. Okay, and the teacher found that he had scissors. He didn't come to school to use those scissors as a weapon. He was out of the school the next day. So, I mean, what did he think of that experience? And then you see a lot of situations in schools now, especially in New York City, where a long time ago, when I was a kid, an incident would be handled by a disciplinarian. Now it's a police affair. And so it's beginning really, really early. They're pulling those kids out of the mainstream and getting them ready for prison.
With that being said, it's also important for people to understand that young people are, women and young people are the highest growing rates of individuals who are being incarcerated, or the fastest growing rates of people who are being incarcerated in our society. And that, I don't know if anybody has seen Capitalism, A Love Story, when Michael Moore is discussing the Philadelphia child care situation, the PA child care situation, where there are judges out here who are literally taking throwbacks from lobbyists, from organizations, to incarcerate people under the age of 16.
In private prisons.
Yes, when we end private prisons. And the abuses that are taking place in those institutions, they're not much off from the abuses that are taking place in the institutions for adults. We placed the list in the movie of companies and corporations which are tapping into the prison system. What a lot of people don't know is that, TWA uses California youth offenders to book flights. They work just like the regular adult inmates work. They're being tapped into as a resource as well. And when they come from environments which are, once again, disenfranchised, under-resourced, underfunded, they are just as easily targetable as the next. I mean, we've had an era of child slavery in our society that we don't discuss as well. And so, yes, children are definitely being targeted at a much younger age. The quicker they get them into the system, the longer they can keep them in the system. And create a situation where these young people, they don't have the wherewithal, the guidance, or the understanding to fight their way out of that system. And it is a fight. It's a very distinct battle to come out of that system.
Another question, something I thought was interesting in the film, and I think you mentioned it too. He talked about how people in prison you don't see them, they're segregated away, you don't know who these people are. At least a lot of people in the United States don't. But I was thinking, and it's not mentioned in the thing, I think there is a direct relationship between the segregated nature of the prison system and the segregation in American society, which is still pretty prevalent. So here, 95, 98% of Canfield and Poland might be white, but the majority of Youngstown is black. And if you've been to the neighborhoods where the neighborhoods are the most problems, the neighborhoods where there's lots of kids who are in prison, their parents are in prison, those neighborhoods are like 90% black. And then the same with the public school systems. Having done substituting in public school systems, I was amazing. I could be in a city where 80% of the county was white, but the public school district in the inner city could be 95% black. I mean, it gets to the point where if you go to a city, a bad inner city school, or a bad school in any urban area, without even going to the school, just knowing that it's a terrible school, I could guess, I guarantee this school is 80, 90% black. And the best school in the same system, without even going there, I can say, well, I bet you that school's 90% white. And it's almost always a safe bet to make. So it seems like, I don't know if you want to speak to if there's a relationship between segregation, residential and school segregation in the society, and then, the prison system.
Yeah, it's you live in a poor neighborhood, you go to a poor school, so and that was definitely the experience growing up. I've done some substitute teaching in Youngstown and Toledo, and and seeing that definitely be the case, and then I went to Cheney High School on the west side, and it was interesting going there because I went to school on the south side, and the west side of town was predominantly white, and so going to Cheney High School, it was interesting to see how different, even in the same public school system, the difference between the schools, between the inner city kind of junior high school and elementary school, and even my high school friends. And the west side is still the inner city, but it's not the inner city in the way that we think of it, or at least thought of it back then, because it was majority white. And so even seeing that difference between how going to a predominantly white school in the inner city was still kind of interesting. And then of course over the years as schools closed, the dynamics and the racial makeup of Cheney changed a little bit. So it's
just to interrupt, I think it's really cool. I mean, clearly your film is working because this is a really good discussion that's going on. So congratulations, nicely done. Michelle, you had your hand up earlier.
I just have a quick question. I want to say, by the way, my kids go to the Poland School District, and there's plenty of drug and alcohol use in that school system.
Oh, yeah.
Those kids going to jail. I'm just going to say that. My question for you is, today you have obviously a predominantly white audience. Does your film, it's got to play differently. Does your message, is it different? If you're playing it to more of a black audience or an ethnic audience, how is your message different? right? Because you've got two totally different perspectives, I would imagine, or at least pretty different perspectives. So, I mean, your film is what it is, but how the audience perceives it is different. Whether it's anger or whether it's, you know, how is your message? Is it different? Maybe it's not.
Well, I don't know. I think, and this has just been my thought process on it. Maybe you have something different, but I think it's more dependent on maybe the mindset of the audience more so than the racial makeup of the audience. Because when we've done other screenings, especially the screenings that are outside of film festivals, where we set it up with a political group or something like that, or go to a college campus, a lot of the people who are coming in, whether they be black or white, a lot of them are made aware for the first time, really, a lot of what's being portrayed in the film. And then you have a group of people who have experienced the system. They this has been a part of their lives. They've had that really close connection to the system, and they're like, yeah, this is exactly what goes on. This is exactly how it is. This is exactly what we're trying to get out to people. But I think that more so it's been a matter of those who have had experience with the system and those who have not, and they go across racial lines. We haven't really had the experience of the uber controversy of people are like, okay, that makes sense. I think that one of the things that it's been, the film's been presented in a way that makes it accessible to people, especially even if they haven't had any experience with the system, because it's not a film that says the system, there's something wrong with the system, not there's something wrong with you. And I think that's why people are able to kind of grab onto it and say, oh, well, I hadn't thought about it that way. And one of the most telling things was it kind of gets us to look at ourselves and the way that we're even educated about our own society, because we've gone into criminal justice classes. Now, criminal justice, people going to study criminal justice, and one of the first questions we ask when we go into a classroom,
What does the 13th Amendment say?
why is it important in society?
Well, they have to know what it says first.
Right.
And
what's significant about it?
Yeah, in those two situations with that particular, because it was a divided criminal justice class, the same instructor for both classes, and only one person was able to even say what the 13th Amendment was in the first class, and in the second class, no one even knew what it was. They didn't know, and let alone why it was important in society. I think that probably the most irate response that we got was probably at Columbus State when we went down there for the screening. And we had it wasn't us, it was one young woman in the audience who decided to take the stance of, and we didn't know her personally or anything. I'm a pretty observant individual. I pick up on things with people, and I kind of got her story just from listening to her speak and the way she presented herself. And she was one of the very few people who decided to see all of the facts in the film and come back at us with this, it's all about the choices you make. And you can choose to live a life that's going to land you in prison, or you can choose to be about the right thing. And it wasn't until after everything that we were informed by someone very close to her that she was a raging drug addict for a while, and got saved by being in a relationship with a man who was a county sheriff, and he would bail her out of situations nonstop. But she was extreme. And then a friend of ours was sitting in front of them, and I guess he was mumbling the whole time as we were discussing, the facts and figures about we're really working hard to educate ourselves, not to just present our opinions or some conjecture about what it means to have the prison system doing what it's doing in our society. And he's back there, oh, bull, that's not true. And 85% of all of the flat gear in the United States is not made by federal prison inmates. It's made in China. Well, that's just not a fact. The fact of the matter is, but I think that's probably the most resistance that we've ever gotten. And, I don't know that the racial side of thing had anything to do with it. The components that we bring forward in this film, we're trying to create a complete picture of what is going on with our prison system. The exception for slavery is not, there's nothing attached to race with that. Have we gotten different responses from black folks and white folks per se? I don't think so. I think that Dee is extremely accurate in regards to the mindset. And a lot of people are coming in with a blank slate. They have, well, not a blank slate. They come in with a slate that is obviously skewed towards either thinking that inmates are bad, or not caring and being completely apathetic, or simply not thinking about it at all. And when you present them with a bunch of information that leads them to think about the prison system, to think about the fact that these disparities exist, the same disparities that we see existing in our day-to-day living, you know, there's a reason for it. And so most people end up very curious. They are wanting to know how they can get involved, where they can get more information, and they're congratulating us on being bold enough. It's not bravery to speak the truth, but to be bold enough to just state the facts and say, this is something you need to consider. I don't care if you don't know an inmate. I don't care if you've never met anybody or never been to prison. The truth of the matter is if you don't care anything except about your tax dollars, at the end of the day, everybody has a reason to be bothered by the way that our prison system operates. We dig into the social side of things. The fiscal side of things is another big deal. When you hear Angela Davis talk about how deeply entrenched corporations are in the perpetuation of the prison system, you should just make us mad. It really should, to know that there are people who are profiting billions of dollars a year and not paying the people. These are jobs that could be going to people outside of institutions even. You know, but we're footing the bill as taxpayers for these institutions to exist so that larger corporations can continue to make these gross profits. The fact that they're making it off of people that they're not paying is much more important to me than the fact that these people are inmates, you know? So we're trying to present all of this information in a way to consolidate it and let you know there's a bunch of reasons why you need to be concerned about the prison system in the United States. The racial motivation behind it, the fact that slavery is still legal, the fact that corporations are profiting grossly off of it, the fact that they're targeting disenfranchised individuals to be a part of that system. All of these are reasons why, as citizens, we should be up in arms.
Right there.
Dee and National Trona, thank you. It was an outstanding film. I've been a criminal defense lawyer for about 25 years, so I'm pretty intimately, acquainted with the prison system. I've been to probably 14 of the 22 institutions in Ohio. And I came away from this still with my mouth open. I never realized those facts. I never understood in that kind of complex, context. Two things I guess that probably stood out the most. One is the economics. How much economics or diseconomics drives crime? I think in Ohio, you would know better than me, but I think the number is about $31,000 per year per inmate it takes to house and feed and clothe and shelter an inmate. So if you look at that from purely a hypothetical sense, you could afford to give every inmate $24,000 and say, don't commit crime, and you'd be saving $7,000 or $8,000, which is ridiculous.
Right.
But when we think about really the economic opportunities or lack thereof inside, urban areas, I don't want to go into litany and verse here about, lack of education, lack of family support, lack of role models. And it's not that's not just an urban problem. That's not just a Black America problem. That's white America too. We worship money, and whether the money, the millions that are made by an NFL player or a baseball player or a rapper or a drug dealer, it doesn't matter. We worship that person who makes all this money. Money's become the new god, And so for a consumer-driven society like ours, everybody kind of feeds into that, So we're sending a message to the youth of America that if you make a lot of money, no matter how you make it, you're a good person. I've got hundreds of parents of my clients, and my clients are without a doubt abject drug dealers, robbers, burglars, but they benefit. And the parents and grandparents, they get the plasma TV, they get the new cars, they get the leather coat, they get the 24 Dubs on the
Let's not forget the chicks.
Exactly. and so they kind of turn a blind eye to it. And that blind eye part of the problem too is kind of the next segue I want to make, which is that as a society, I think, you touched on it earlier, Natural, you know, people who commit crimes, who go to prison are inherently bad people, so we have to punish them. Maybe it's a poor analogy, but if you say, I'm gonna put this dog in a cage, and I'm gonna poke it with a stick every day for 10 years, and then you let the dog out of the cage and the dog bites you, you know, you go, wow, I gave that dog food and water, and I kept it inside, I treated it so nice, it was a bad dog though, you know? We wonder about that. People that get institutionalized from being in prisons for these long onerous sentences, 20 years, life sentences, whatever, we have to remember they're gonna get out. And you know, I think, I forget who it was, somebody famous said, you know, we can only judge, a nation should only be judged by how it treats the worst of its citizens. And so that side of it too is that, you know, if we can't just have blinders on and expect that we're going to put this person in prison and that's going to teach them the lesson that they need, because all it teaches them, as you well know, is teach you to be a better criminal. Right. I've had clients go to prison for something innocuous, like joyriding in a stolen car. 2-year sentence, come out, now they're a major weight dealer. They got a connection with some, you know, Dominicans from New York City. They're bringing in kilos of cocaine to Youngstown, and you take a rather small petty crime. You know, you lay down with dog, you wake up with fleas. You have somebody in a prison system where all they do is hang around 24 hours a day with the criminals. They become a better criminal. So I really applaud you. I think it's a fantastic film, and I'm really looking forward to the next segment, whenever it is.
Thank you.
It's the second time I've seen it. I saw it the first time in Lemongrove, and it's equally fantastic. You have a little more in there about Lucasville to Lemongrove, and that was great. You should keep that in there. No, I mean, it was very, very graphic and very good, because people don't realize how awful that uprising was.
I imagine that'll probably go back
I
into
think two of the most important things are education and rehabilitation. They get no education and they get no rehabilitation. Somehow in this country, we have to get education back into the prison system and rehabilitation back in there. You can't expect a drugger to go in there. They can get the drugs in prison, for God's sakes. You know, I mean, it's just, you've got to, the mindset of the country has to, and it has to start not only in the prisons, but in the first grade.
Mm-hmm.
If we have to go back to busing, you know, kids so that they're in different, you know, so that they have, when I went to Rand, we had kids of every ethnic and every color and whatever, and it was great. We got to know them all, we lived with them, we played with them, we partied with them, we did ever, but they don't do that nowadays. And that's really sad, because they don't know somebody of color or somebody of, you know, another
It's
ethnic
the
background or whatever.
historical amnesia that
Yeah.
Angela Davis was talking about.
Exactly.
And it really does speak to how, you know, our society is very, very much geared towards itself and in the interior. And so when it comes to any type of ideas or different ideas about how things are being done, we might look at them and look at them as being far-fetched ideas or impossible ideas. But the fact of the matter is, all we have to do is look at other societies that exist right alongside us to see how they do things differently, and how they can have a society that is a little bit more peaceful and a little bit more humane. And I always try to meet people where they're at, as far as, you know, we have the ability and the right to have different opinions, to see things in a different way, to think this idea might be better than this idea. But there's certain places where we should also be able to meet and agree together. For example, talking about, huge issues such as the death penalty, right? And so I say, okay, well, I'm a person who doesn't believe that we should have a death penalty. If I talk to someone who believes that the death penalty is an appropriate, appropriate punishment for certain crimes, I can say, okay, well, that's your opinion and that's my opinion. Now, you and I, as people who believe on different spectrums, we can both agree that innocent people should not be put to death, right? You know, and so that becomes somewhere where I can get someone who believes in something on the opposite end of the spectrum of myself to at least say, okay, well, let's take a look at this situation, because this person's on death row. And although you believe that, you know, death is an appropriate sentence for certain crimes, let's at least make sure that this person is not innocent. Or the notion of, the notion of the 13th Amendment. We start to talk about slavery in our society. I'll say, okay, well,
Whether or not you believe,
Whether or not you believe
system
that-
should be abolished, we all agree that slavery is wrong.
Right. You know.
At least I hope we do.
Right. We haven't met anyone yet who's willing to say, well, you know, I think slavery is a good thing.
We haven't come across that individual yet.
But if you look at and you know, we understand that, you know, not every single person in society is going to be able to say, well, this amendment says this amendment says that to our Constitution. We should, as citizens of this country, we should know what our Constitution says, especially if we're going to be making the laws and different things like that, or voting on them. However, it's right there in black and white, and the Constitution, as things are written in the Constitution, as people who are in law know, laws are written with certain wording to be very specific to the law. And it's not necessarily what the law says is what the law is. And so when you look at the 13th Amendment and you see that, you know, it says that neither slavery nor voluntary servitude except, you already know once that word except comes in, that means that it is allowed. you know, and so we can't deny as a society that slavery is still legal in our society. We can be of the opinion that it's not because we don't have people in shackles picking cotton down south. Well, we do, but we don't, you know, but you know, we don't have the Gone with the Wind. You know, we don't have all these the slavery that we know about in our history books. But if you read the Constitution, you read what the 13th Amendment says, it is undeniable, no matter how you feel about it, that slavery is legal in our society and it still exists.
And also, you know, we recognize the great fortune that roots is not still happening in the United States of America. We recognize the great fortune of progress in that regard. However, what you're saying speaks to the core of what it is we're looking to get across to people in this film. And that is that what's happening with our system isn't happening on accident. It's not happening, it's not just, oh, well, that just happens to be a side effect of ... et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is that the system is designed to operate the way that it's operated. And while we know there are societies in this world who have proven through their choices, socially speaking, that they are not trying to simply use their citizens for profit. You know, that's not what's happening in the States. This is a country which has determined that certain things are okay so long as they are profitable to a very, you know, off of the larger amount of individuals for the very smaller, much smaller amount of individuals. It's like the gentleman said about it being a profit-driven, us being a profit-driven nation. This system has been designed to operate the way that it's designed. The prison industrial complex is so integrally involved with the education industrial complex, the military industrial complex. We are, by my opinion, obviously, living in a society that wants us to remain at the bottom of the totem pole and to be blind to the notion because we think we're wealthy. We can go and get nice clothes, we can get nice cars, we can get iPods and, you know, iPhones, and we have the liberty of standing in line to pay millions of dollars a year to watch movies that are really awful, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Bad education. We can afford to invest in a prison system at the rate of roughly $30,000 a year per inmate, while we are only spending in some school districts as little as $8,000 a year per student. These are choices that are being made in order to ensure the power of a very few individuals. And this system is, you know, it's no different than the other systems which are put in place in our society to maintain that disparity between the rich and the poor.
It's kind of akin to the same notion that used to get people on board with the racialization of slavery. You know, before when indentured servitude, you know, involved people of all races, poor whites, even.
Then there was the Bacon's Rebellion.
Right, and then people would be able to come together and say, hey, we come together off a similar circumstance, more so than because your skin color is different, your culture is different, and we can come together and be together. And so when they racialize slavery and say, well, you might be poor, you might not have a lot, but at least you're white and you're not one of them, right? And so.
And on the flip side of that, you are poor, you are nothing, and you're black. You
Right.
know, I mean, it's like it wasn't just happening with white people being convinced to think they were better than black people. It was also a work to make sure that black people were being convinced to think that they were not as important or valuable as white people. And in today's society, those two things still exist. They still exist in a way that surprises us sometimes when we encounter the youth and, you know, find out what their mentality is about who they are in this society and why they are as high as or as low as they are on the totem pole. But it still exists, very much so.
And our system has designed basically a notion that it kind of creates an us against them kind of mentality. And so therefore, because we do come from a great amount of privilege, no matter what our racial background is, as people, citizens of the United States, we come from a great amount of privilege. For those of us who have not had to deal with incarceration firsthand, again, all those material things that were mentioned earlier, kind of puts us against them type of system to say that because we, we are engrossed in our technology and our social networking and different things like that, we don't have anything in common with these people who are locked away in these boxes and put away.
I'm going to take one more question from the audience, and someone over here was waiting. Gentlemen. Over here.
The most dramatic part I felt was your printing of the text of the 13th Amendment. Now, I have the Constitution on my iPhone. It's the app, so I'm familiar with the wording.
Right.
And was that your idea to deconstruct and reconstruct those individual words?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just kind of like because I kind of got the sense of how do we make this say basically what it means.
The translation of
What
it.
is the layman's translation? Because and people who are involved in law know as well. When, you start to the bills that come through Congress or everything like that, they're 700, 1,000 pages, all this kind of stuff. Well, what does it really say?
Well, they get down to a few words: must, shall, will.
Right.
Where the punctuation is, that makes all the difference in the world.
Right. Exactly.
If you're going to grieve it, that's what the grievance is
So
based on.
right. So it was like, okay, we can take those words and we can just kind of crunch them together and say what it really is saying. And I can't recall the complete genesis of the idea to do that, but it was definitely very early on. Like that's where it needs to go in order to say this is what it says. Because it's kind of like a counter narrative to what it is that we are taught in school. Because usually, if someone can't tell me what the 13th Amendment says, usually they can tell me what they learned about it in school, which was the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. That's kind of how it's been ingrained in our minds. The 13th Amendment is the amendment that abolished slavery.
But it didn't. It just relegated it to a certain select.
Right. It just changed the scope of slavery, which is a very important part that's left out of our.
Hey, what's the pay range right now in the Ohio Department of Corrections?
In the state institutions, inmates are making roughly $27, and that's if they're at the lowest status of they do it basically minimum, medium,
Is it by
maximum
the hour?
security.
They actually have an hour?
No, per month.
Okay. So
27.
what is the hourly equivalent of that?
I think it's about like 19 cents
Yeah, I
or
heard it
something
was
like that.
17 cents.
Yeah. It's and you'll find those variations. Federal inmates get paid a little bit more for the jobs that they do. And oddly enough, they don't work as hard
Right.
as the state inmates do. We're not just talking about being porters within the institution. As you saw, there are plenty of corporations which have contracted with institutions to go in, and these inmates manufacture, package, and sell products of all different sorts. From Victoria's Secret underwear and catalogs right down to the components for the computers and phones that we use on a daily basis.
Most people think it's just the license plates.
It's rarely the license plates.
And
In
the
fact, you will
license
find
plate-
in the state of Ohio
Yeah.
that maybe one institution does license
And
plates.
that's the good paying work.
But the interesting
true?
thing about that is that the inmates do have quite a hand in the running of the institution when it comes to all of the food that gets cooked, all of the laundry that gets done, all of the cleaning that gets done in the institution. They don't outsource this to other corporations and have them come in and do it. Rarely will you find the laundry actually, unless it's a small institution that doesn't have large laundry facilities, you won't find that stuff being outsourced. It's inmates that are doing all of that.
At least they don't have them building the prisons that they're gonna be incarcerated.
Actually, that happens
Do
too.
they still?
Yeah.
They built Leavenworth.
Virginia.
Yeah, that
They
happens
built- The
too.
Ohio State Penitentiary was all convict labor almost.
Really, so,
Just like slaves built the White House.
Right?
well, except that being a convict,
Washington
making a
line.
prison is sort of like digging your own grave. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, well,
We were, and I really quickly, before we move, let this gentleman come up and discuss his fantastic short as well. I really appreciate that you picked up on that. That was one of my very favorite things that D. Jones did in the film. I actually asked him to do something else in the film that I felt was really important, the comparative between what the slave ships and the bays in the slave ships looked like by comparison to what the prisons look like at this point in time. But, I mean, I was very excited when he...
They shot all the feet, what was that?
It was actually a head-on, it's an artistic impression, it's a drawing.
Was that in a slave ship?
Of a slave ship.
A little hard to tell between that and a
It
concentration
should be a
camp.
concentration camp.
Same thing,
Same thing.
absolutely the same thing.
Yeah.
So, we thank you guys very much for having
Well, thank
us.
you
and
for showing
really
your
appreciate
film.
the opportunity.
I can't wait to see the next one, not because this was a thrilling experience, but because it was very impactful and very convicting.
Just so everyone knows, the second in the series is actually going to discuss the Lucasville uprising and human rights violations within the prison system a lot more extensively. And that is slated to be released no later than, it might be finished by December, depending on how much time he's able to invest between now and then, but it definitely has to be finished by April of next year, because in Columbus, April 19th through the 21st, there's going to be a conference about the Lucasville uprising. It's the 20-year anniversary in 2013, and we're hoping to have lots of dynamic individuals there, as well as screenings going on with this film and a few other films. So the LucasvilleAmnesty.org, right?
No, they actually changed the name of it, but we'll have links to the Youngstown Film Festival page for the links to also the page for this film and everything like that. So we'll make sure that the information, is accessible, especially if you reference the film festival here as a place to kind of find it.
Cool, thank you very much. Nicely
Thank you.
done.
Thank you.